And I have a couple slides I'd love to share with you about that. Give me just 1 second. But here in Burlington, we have the opportunity to adopt ranked choice voting on town meeting day. A lot of Burlington voters may have already received their ballots. They should be arriving in mailboxes anytime between now and the end of the week. And if Burlington voters have not yet gotten their ballots by Friday, they should go ahead and reach out and call their town clerks who will be able to get them their ballots. And you should be dropping your ballot in the mail by the 22nd in order for it to be counted, or bring it to one of the drop boxes at your polling location or at City Hall Park. Right. So sorry. Okay, here we go. So let me just go ahead and share a couple quick slides. So, like I said before, ranked choice voting allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference. So that's 1, 2, 3. And you can see over here, we have an example of what a ranked choice voting ballot might look like. If any one candidate just goes ahead and wins 50 plus 1% of the vote, or a majority of votes, then they're the winner. And if your vote can't help your top choice win, then your vote counts for the next choice. And this process, like I said, continues until there's a majority winner. So this is an actual screenshot of what your ballot is going to look like on town meeting day. So this is the question as it will appear to Burlington voters. It's important to note that this charter change to adopt ranked choice voting applies only to the election of city councilors, and that begins in 2022. So you might be asking yourself, how does this differ from how we're currently electing folks? Great question. Right now, city council candidates only need 40% of votes to win. This means that they don't need the support of a majority of voters. In fact, they might be the least supported candidate in the race if a majority of voters think that one of the other candidates is the better option. Similarly, if no one candidate wins that 40% threshold right now, we hold a separate runoff election on a different election day. And that means additional costs. Generally, runoff elections have much lower participation. And of course, we have a longer delay in determining who is actually going to be holding that office. So ranked choice voting solves all these problems. It elects majority winners with the support of more than 50% of the voters. It also eliminates these high cost, low participation runoff elections. And it provides voters more choices because you're free to vote with your heart. You're free to rank your candidate in order of what you truly believe is first, second, third choice. You don't have to worry about whether your first choice candidate is the most popular candidate, if voting for them is strategic. If you think that, you don't have to worry about any of those things. We're eliminating the spoiler candidate effect. If your first choice is not elected, you still get a say in the ultimate outcome of the election because your second choice vote will be counted, and so on and so forth. And that is all I have for you guys. I would love now to introduce our Better Ballot Burlington co-chairs. And I think we're going to start now with Ward 1 Councilor Zoraya Hightower.
Thank you so much, Kate. Happy to be here. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be on the call with Howard and Jerry, Rob, and Anna. I'm just going to talk a little bit about ranked choice voting and then go into a little bit of backstory on my own candidacy. Ranked choice voting helps us elect leaders that are generally more representative of their constituents. Of the 23 municipalities across the country that use ranked choice voting, 11, so just about half of those, the mayor is a woman compared to only 22% nationwide. And after adopting ranked choice voting, these municipalities are also more likely to elect folks of color. Generally, women and BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, are more likely to be affected by the wait your turn mentality and the negative campaigning that plagues plurality elections. I too was told by many to wait my turn when I decided to run last year. It took and it takes a lot of courage and momentum to not listen to those voices, especially if you're going to be a historic candidate. As the first woman of color to hold a council seat in Burlington, I believe a better ballot helps elect leaders that are more representative of our city and cities across the country. As a councilor in Burlington, which I've been told is a little bit more contentious than other cities in Vermont and those around the US, I'm also really excited about the tendency of ranked choice voting to make politics a little less negative. I think it can do a lot to make folks more collaborative and focused on policies over party and politics. And along those lines, I'm really excited to pass this off to my co-chair from another party, Howard Dean.
Thank you very much. And I'll be brief, and Zoraya pretty much nailed it. This does three things. One, it's more fair because everybody gets a say. I voted in ranked choice votings, and my candidate did not win. And I still felt good about the result because I, at some point, voted for the candidate and ranked them. And you don't have to vote for everybody. If there's somebody you really don't want to have win, just don't put them on the list. But put them on the list in order, and it gives us a say, even though our candidate may not win. We've at least had a say, and we may have voted for them in the second position or the third position. We get to consider everybody. Secondly, it saves money. If you have a runoff election in the city of Burlington, it is expensive to run the election. And the worst part about it is roughly 60% of the people who voted in the first election vote in the second election. I don't think we want in Burlington or anyplace else our city councilors to be elected by a tiny group of people in the ward that don't represent the whole city. That's just not a good thing. And the third thing that Zoraya mentioned, I think, is really critical. This politics has become really nasty. And this eliminates the nastiness. You get penalized as a politician for trashing another candidate because you hope that if you're not the first choice, that you're going to be somebody's second choice. But if you're busy trashing their candidacy, then you're going to drive voters away. I think we could use a little more civility in politics. And we'll get it with ranked choice voting. It doesn't mean that progressives can't be progressives or conservatives can't be conservatives. What it does mean is that you're going to treat other people with more respectfully because of ranked choice voting, because there's a real penalty to nasty convention. So one, it saves money. Two, it's much fairer. And three, it eliminates a lot of the nastiness. So I really hope that you'll vote yes on question 4.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Better Ballot Burlington co-chairs, Governor Dean and Councilor Hightower. And now I would love to turn it over to Ben & Jerry's founder and CEO, Jerry Greenfield.
Well, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here, and I am thrilled to be supporting this. You know, I am not just an ice cream guy. I am very interested in supporting our democracy and making sure that our candidates represent people. As part of Ben & Jerry's, the company's been involved in a bunch of voting and democracy initiatives. The company was supporting the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. It's worked with the NAACP in North Carolina with its flavor Empowerment. Any of you guys remember Empowerment? There's a program to get the dough out of politics. And probably closest to my heart of all was when Ben and I got arrested in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2016 at the Democracy Spring and Democracy Awakening movements. We were doing nonviolent civil disobedience to reduce the influence of money in politics, expand and protect voting rights, and make sure that all Americans have a voice in our government. So that is why I am here to not only talk about ice cream, but to talk about how thrilled I am to be supporting this. So there is ice cream involved. It's not just Jerry yapping. This is going to be a real live demonstration of how ranked choice voting works, not with candidates, but with ice cream flavors. There's going to be a link in the chat that Kate is going to post. I'm going to talk a little bit about the flavors so you guys can think about the ice cream flavor candidates that you want to be supporting. I've picked out a great bunch of flavors. There are 5 flavors that you're going to be considering. Americone Dream, vanilla ice cream with a caramel swirl, fudge covered pieces of waffle cones. You guys remember that, right? Cherry Garcia, dark sweet cherries and chocolate chunks. Chocolate fudge brownie, self-explanatory. Tonight dough, very complex flavor. Chocolate and caramel ice creams, chocolate chip cookie dough, peanut butter cookie dough, and a chocolate cookie swirl. And then Chunky Monkey. I'm going to call Chunky Monkey the dark horse in this one. Banana ice cream, walnuts, and chocolate chunks. Surprisingly popular. I'll let you guys know these flavors all happen to be the top 10 selling flavors for Ben & Jerry's in pints in 2020. So make sure you go into the chat and get this real life demonstration of ranked choice voting. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jerry. And now I would love to turn things over to the co-founder, president, and CEO of Fair Vote, Mr. Rob Richie.
Thank you. I can't really top that, Jerry, but great to see you all, and so excited that Burlington's having this conversation. And it's really part of an exciting national conversation that we've been part of, and something I've worked on a long time, but is just these last 5 years in particular has really reached, a tipping point isn't quite right, but it's reached a point of consolidation of the case and opportunities to show it in practice that are really compelling. And it's just been on a really string of important evidence that this makes a lot of sense. And so I just thought I'd run through some of the things that have happened. So we now have 2 states that are using ranked choice voting for presidential elections. We'll hear a little bit about one of them in a moment from Anna. But Alaska is also using it. So we're getting the corners of the country and kind of moving in. And then we had 5 Democratic presidential primaries and caucuses use ranked choice voting last year. You know, had a big field running, and what's a better way in a big field than handle choice than allow voters more say and a chance to rank their candidates. That was happening on the Democratic side, even as there were 3 Republican state conventions where they used ranked choice voting, like the new Attorney General of Indiana was won at a ranked choice voting contest at the Indiana Republican contest after finishing second in the first vote. It's been on the ballot in 3 states, and 11 cities in the last 5 years, and it's won all but one of those. It was on all 6 cities that voted on it last year, passed it by an average of more than 20 points. And then it's just beginning to move legislatively as well. So we have bills in more than 25 states right now. They're not all going to pass, but the first one that's passed the chamber is in Utah, which has a very strong bipartisan support to essentially make it more likely that more of their cities are able to use ranked choice voting. We have 2 Utah cities use it in 2019, but we could see 10 to 15. Particularly this bill kind of does some things that helps on the administrative side. And the conversation is really beginning to happen more in Congress. A lot of people noticed our congressman here from Tacoma Park, Jamie Raskin, played a big role in the nation last week, but he's the prime sponsor of the Ranked Choice Voting Act, a big backer of that. That would establish ranked choice voting for all congressional elections. Sponsors include Ayanna Presley from Boston, Barbara Lee, kind of a mix of members who are getting on board, and that's something that I think is going to grow in interest as a conversation. And I think what has happened in general is that as we've seen how it works, like some of the issues of administration are now really being smoothed out. So places can adopt it more easily and use it more easily, see it in practice. The candidates are learning to embrace ranked choice voting. I think what Governor Dean said about the incentives that it creates are real, and it's just very practical. Like if you as a voter can do more than just pick one person, it's sensible for you to get to know more than one candidate, right? And so when Santa Fe first used ranked choice voting in 2018, they had about 20 mayoral debates, and people were sort of stunned that they were all just packed one after the other. And you would go to So they were trying to find out from the people, well, why are you going to all these debates? And they said, well, I've made my choice for my first person, but I wanted to get to know what the others were too, right? And so you start kind of that engagement on the voter side, and then the candidates just have a reason to talk to more people. And it's fun to talk to candidates that have run in both a single choice and a ranked choice system, and they just say that, you know, like, oh, I just started talking to everybody, you know, and there's some real value in that. You still want to get first choices, but you also want backup choices. New York City, by the way, is starting to use ranked choice voting. They have 2 special elections this month with it, and it's going to be used in their mayoral race in June in their primary, with a lot of interesting candidates running. Actually, the front runner right now is Andrew Yang, who's a huge backer of ranked choice voting, and also getting a chance to run in that system. And it's really playing out. Like, that's a really good example of how it makes a difference when you have these interesting multiracial electorates where there's no majority, but you create a majority, and you create a majority by engaging and speaking to the voters that most like you, but speaking to others as well, and sort of building a majority, and therefore having people need to be listened to and sort of part of what your vote is. And so that'll be a really fun one to watch how that plays out. By the way, a good example of sort of how ranked choice voting holds up, that got on the ballot in New York because a charter commission appointed by sort of a whole mix of people in the city looked at options, voted 13-1 to put it on the ballot, and then 73% of voters voted yes. And so now, you know, our nation's biggest city will be using ranked choice voting. So we could touch base on this and that. Maybe I'll end by just quickly sharing my screen also. Oh no, I won't worry about that. You can go to fairvote.org, and you can see, if you go to ranked choice voting, sort of the places that it's being used and sort of the variety of ways it's being used. But there are about half of states or more at this point where something has happened, where ranked choice voting is being used for something. And I think our goal within a few years is to have that be 50 states. So good luck to this conversation going on in Burlington.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. And now I am thrilled to introduce Anna Keller. They are Maine's League of Women Voters Executive Director. And I know that Maine has had some experience with ranked choice voting, to say the least. So I'm really excited to hear what you all have to share.
Thanks for having me from the other side of New England to continue this conversation. Maine has been having a lot of fun with ranked choice voting over the last couple of years. And I'm in Portland, where we've been using ranked choice voting for the longest time in Maine. Our charter commission and then the voters passed using ranked choice voting to elect our mayor all the way back in 2010. That was a window into the advantages of ranked choice voting. And we then were able to have it pass at the state level in 2016. We elected our US representatives in 2018 using ranked choice voting. We had crowded primaries for governor in that year use it. It was the first statewide use of ranked choice voting, and it went really well. So the league is both an advocate for ranked choice voting because we see the advantages that it brings, which everyone has really touched on so far. But in Maine, we have a long history, like Vermont, of having independence, of having more than 2 parties, and of having multi-candidate races. And when you've got that, you get a whole host of problems that ranked choice voting can solve. So when we have RCV, we don't have the spoiler effect, which makes people more excited about voting when they are not worried that they're going to have to vote for someone that they don't really like just to avoid getting the person that is the worst from being in office. And I think it makes the experience of being a voter a lot more pleasant. The conversations that you get to have when you're talking politics with friends can be about the issues and not, people yelling at each other for how could you possibly, be supporting that person? Don't you realize that that's what that's going to mean? And those sort of conversations. And it also, for us, has had the impact of creating some more durable majority winners. One thing that I think is really interesting is that the first candidate who was elected in a very close ranked choice voting race where it made the difference in our congressional district was reelected with a stronger majority the second time around, and has been able to sort of consolidate those people who voted for him as the second choice, felt okay with that, and ended up having felt well represented. The last thing that I'll just say from the perspective of somebody living in Portland and going through this is that last year in March of 2020, Portland voted to expand ranked choice voting to our city council and school board races, and it passed with 83% of the vote, which is a testament to the Portland that had been using it the longest really likes it, and it felt like such an easy choice to expand it to use for the rest of our municipal races. In those city council and school board elections this past November, we elected Portland's and one of Maine's first Indigenous elected leaders. We elected a very diverse and very, I think, representative city council and school board. And where Portland has had some very nasty and contentious races in the past, these were campaigns that were conducted with a much better level of civility and engagement, and everything that Rob was saying about Santa Fe and candidates engaging more. One of the things that the League of Women Voters does is we put out a voter guide, and we had the same kind of more demand for our voter guide because people wanted to learn about who they should put as their second choice once they'd made their first choice. And I love seeing that kind of more thoughtful engagement with politics, where it becomes more about the issues and having that conversation. It's not perfect, nothing's a silver bullet, but it has made a real noticeable difference. And that's why people have supported it with higher numbers each time that ranked choice voting has been on the ballot in Maine.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anna. That was wonderful. And now I'm going to go ahead and reveal the results, which I know we're all super excited to hear about. So I am pleased to share that although it was very close, we did not have a winner with more than 50% of the vote in our first round of voting. So you can see here, this is everyone's first round vote. And even though Cherry Garcia had a pretty good lead, a lot of other votes were still cast for the other delicious flavors of Ben & Jerry's. And then in the second round, we eliminated the lowest vote getter. You can see it's in red here. And those votes, we went to those voters' second choice votes, which are shown in green. And it looks like it went to Americone Dream. And then just like I mentioned earlier, this process went on, Americone Dream. Fortunately, that next vote wasn't enough and was eliminated. And those transferred 4 votes. 1 of them went to Tonight Dough and 3 of them went to Chocolate Fudge Brownie. But in the end, after the elimination of Tonight Dough and several votes going to Chocolate Fudge Brownie in the 4th round, Cherry Garcia was the ultimate victor of this ranked choice voting election of our favorite Ben & Jerry's flavor. So thank you everyone who voted. We did get 28 ballots, so that is a really awesome participation and I really appreciate it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and open up the floor to any questions you all might have. And in the meantime, I have some questions for our lovely panelists as well. So Governor Dean, on top of serving as a state representative from the Old North End and winning 8 statewide elections as a Democrat, you are the most successful chair of the Democratic National Committee in U.S. history. It sounds like during your tenure, the Democrats won back the presidency, both chambers of Congress, and a majority of governorships. Seems like you have a pretty good feel for what it takes for Democrats to win. However, here in Burlington, it's Democrats in City Hall who seem to oppose ranked choice voting. What are they missing, and what can you say to make Burlington Democrats feel a little more comfortable with ranked choice voting?
Well, that's why I'm here. Look, this is not about parties. This really isn't. It's so I think people who fear ranked choice voting are looking at, well, what does this do for me? I don't think we should look at it that way. I think we should finally start having elections where what does this do for the public? That's what this is really about. People just feel better about ranked choice voting. There was San Francisco's had ranked choice voting for a long time. They had a fascinating election last time where and they now have a woman of color who's the mayor for the first time. But they had a 3-way primary that was very, very contentious. And they soon found out, the people who were being really contentious, that was costing them. Then the two people, these are all experienced politicians, particularly the two that weren't winning and didn't win. They made a public alliance together, ganging up on the third person, and the third person is the one, London Breed, who's now the mayor. So, you kind of get to see what people are like, and then you don't have to pick somebody because you don't want somebody else to win. I'll give you an example of something, 2 examples. Long before Bernie was the force that he is now, he ran in an election when he was mayor of Burlington against Madeline Kunin, who was the first woman governor of the state. And he got all kinds of flack for doing it. And because people were afraid that he would split off votes from Madeline. And after I did civil unions, which is the first marriage equality bill in the country, I was run against by Anthony Polina as a progressive, who got all kinds of flack because it was a really rough election because civil unions at the time was very inflammatory. The problem in a ranked choice voting, none of the progressives wouldn't have gotten that flack, because so people are thinking, oh my God, if we vote for Anthony, who might be our choice, that means we might not verify or validate the civil unions bill or something like that, or we might knock a woman out of the governorship, the first woman ever elected. People shouldn't have to make those choices, and in ranked choice voting they don't have to. They can vote for who they like, and then their second choice can be, if you are progressive and you like a woman governor, or you thought that it was very important to have marriage equality, so you don't have to give up your first choice just because you're making a political calculation. You shouldn't have to make a political calculation when you vote for something you care about. You should be able, and this system allows you not to have to do that. This system basically allows you to vote your heart. And I think that's a better system than we have today, where people are calculating and saying terrible things and running negative ads. Most of that, not all of it, but most of that goes away with ranked choice voting.
Awesome. Thank you, former Governor Dean. And my next question is from the audience, and this one is for you, Rob. Senator Murkowski recently all but admitted that ranked choice voting allowed her to vote her conscience on the impeachment last week. There's an article link that I will pop in the chat, but do you know of any other Republican champions out there for ranked choice voting, or any comments on that specifically?
Oh, well, first about Senator Murkowski, it's interesting for those who followed her career. She's actually had some interesting races before. So she lost the Republican primary and then ran as a write-in candidate and won in the general election electorate. So one of the change that Alaska did was they both changed their nomination process so that it's essentially easier for more candidates to get to the November ballot and not have to win their primary. So that's sort of a separate challenge from ranked choice voting. But ranked choice voting allows that to be easier because they now have 4 candidates who are going to be on the general election ballot, and now they won't be, dividing the vote. And so she is very likely to get the general election ballot, and as she was able to win before, she'll probably be in a very strong position, which is different than most people when they're running for office. It was interesting that Cassidy in Louisiana, who also voted that way on impeachment, runs in an open system in Louisiana, also with a majority system done by a runoff. Republicans and ranked choice voting it's very contextual. If you look at about the bills around the country, there's about 5 or 6 the bills being pushed by Republicans, some very strong backers of it. The Utah support for it is very bipartisan. It's a very Republican state. And they've already passed ranked choice voting legislation 3 of the last 4 years for one thing or another. And this bill that's moving this year would also sort of strengthen this sort of city use of it. So that's kind of a good whole sort of state example of a conversation. And then there's like individual columnists that'll like it, like National Review columnists or David Brooks or some folks. The conversation in Congress is ones that we're really interested in seeing how we can have this be sort of a voter first kind of issue. And it's one that there hasn't been a lot of really attention to what it's going to take to win a majority in Congress. And that's actually something Fair Vote's really deeply committed to doing. And I think that work of finding champions on both sides of the aisle is going to happen. There is, the last thing I'll say is that, say, the Virginia Republican Party may voluntarily use it, right, to nominate candidates statewide this spring. They set up their own systems sometimes for their nomination and don't use the state primary, and there's a pretty good chance that they use ranked choice voting. And they have a big field running for governor, and so they just like, that'll be better to use ranked choice voting. So I think the more we use it, the more that we'll see it being supported and used by both parties. I'll say that one of Governor Dean's successors as DNC chair, Tom Perez on the Democratic side, is a big backer of ranked choice voting, and it is something that certainly major parties, leaders, or people that I've talked to in both parties can be ready to embrace it.
Awesome, thank you, Rob. And now I'm going to move on to another question we just got in the chat, and I will put it out there for the rest of the public to see as well. But we've been asked by Courtney Lambden, who's a 7 Days reporter here in Burlington, if folks can speak on the 2009 mayoral election and how it may or may not have soured Burlington residents to the idea of ranked choice voting. And for a follow-up on how we plan to counter that sentiment in the run-up to town meeting day. And I just want to take my host privileges here for a moment and share that Burlington actually has changed a lot since 2009. In fact, more than 2/3 of the voters who are registered in Burlington today were not on voter rolls in 2010. And I think this is a very new and different electorate, and the voters who are here today really decide to have their voices heard. This campaign is not about sour grapes or relitigating an election that happened more than a decade ago. So after just framing it up a little bit on that, I would love to open it up to anyone else on our lovely panel who would like to comment.
I've already answered. Courtney called me yesterday, so I already answered this question. I voted in that election. I wasn't upset that Bob Kiss won. He did some things he shouldn't have done, but that's this is not an insurance policy against getting perfect candidates. I don't think that's going to have any effect on this election at all. And I think it was unfairly used by the person who ultimately didn't win, who was a Republican. That was not about the system, that it was about somebody who probably shouldn't have been elected mayor, and voters sometimes elect people who shouldn't have been elected mayor. And that's what happens. This has nothing to do, frankly, with ranked choice voting.
Awesome.
I mean, others should dive in here if they want, because Courtney already knows that I think that.
Awesome.
One thing I'll just sort of add nationally is I've worked on this a long time. That was the last jurisdiction to, that was the last vote to stop using ranked choice voting when Burlington did that. And there were a lot of cities using it at the time. They've all kept using it. And some of the places using it are just, I mean, it's as Anna experienced and told about in Portland, I think the more you use it sequentially and the more you get used to it, the more the support's growing. And that's the exit surveys and are showing a place like Minneapolis, I think it's down to 12% would want to go back to their old system or something like that, when it was like 40% after their first use. So it's just like the more people get used to it, the more the candidates get used to it, the more they embrace ranked choice voting culture, the more it gets sustained.
Awesome. Thanks,
It
everyone.
really does. It really does advantage compromisers, people who are willing to bring people together, because it tends to skew votes towards the middle, because those are the most acceptable candidates to the largest number of people. And I think that would be a very healthy thing. I want to make progress, but it'd be great to bring as many people along as possible while we're making the progress. You wouldn't get quite as much rancor in the discussion if you had ranked choice voting, because you pay a penalty for rancor in politics with ranked choice voting.
And unless anyone has anything else they'd like to add on that one, I would love to keep things moving along to a question for Councilor Hightower. Zoraya, Burlington has never had a woman mayor, let alone a person of color in that office. What do you think some of the reasons for that are? And do you think that ranked choice voting could change things?
Yeah, well, I think the reasons for that are, I mean, it's not just the mayor's office. I think with my election, it was also only the second time that our city council achieved gender parity, which is, its own kind of, so it's not just, I think, on, yeah, I think both on race and on gender, and not just at the executive level, but just generally. And I think the short answer to why that is our society still has a preference for white men, and ranked choice voting can't fix that completely, but I think it can do a lot to start to undo that. And I think that's for two reasons. And the first one is just the electability question. I think that comes up much, much more with women and gender minority candidates, and and non people of color. And so folks are then we started to talk about electability, and then folks are afraid to vote for the person who maybe they really want to vote for, because they know that there's kind of this bias against those candidates. And then the second thing is also, the taking a risk aspect. I mean, just because of society, there's more of a, often women and people of color have fewer of the usual qualifications. I'm not sure that I would have been elected against a 30-year incumbent if I weren't Ivy educated, if I weren't working at a consulting firm and as a manager. And so I think that ranked choice voting gives people the confidence to vote for who they want to vote for. Sorry. And then my second reason is I just lost it again. Keep talking and I'll answer the negative politics. I think negative politics also just sticks much more to especially women, whereas it can kind of, if somebody says something about a white man, it does tend to diffuse much faster, whereas it really harms the reputation, I think, of folks that people tend to discriminate against anyway. So I think ranked choice voting especially addresses that second one in terms of not having as much negative campaigning to kind of hurt those candidates in the first place.
Awesome. Thank you, Councilor Hightower. And now I'd love to turn things over to Anna and hear a little bit more about what's going on in Portland. Do you think that people in Maine generally have found things easy to use? I mean, obviously ranked choice voting seems popular there. And I'm also wondering if it's been employed in any mayoral races in Maine, particularly after those last couple of questions.
Yeah, so we've found, I think most people implementing a ranked choice voting system, that it sounds a lot more complicated when somebody's trying to explain it to you in words than it actually is when you use it. And that's why it's great that we had the mock election today. And when people actually go have their first experience using the ballot, a lot of those concerns are diffused. And then people get into the more, weedier questions about, okay, so what does a strategy look like in a ranked choice voting election? And how, should I rank all of my candidates? And we start having those kinds of voter education conversations, which are what we've been working on in the last couple of years, because people in Maine now, they know what it is. They know how to fill out their ballot. They realized the sky didn't fall and we still had elections, and nothing disastrous happened, which it's amazing how sometimes people just are afraid of any change, even if they think it might be good. And so now we're getting to have those conversations about the value of thinking about who you want for your second or third choice. What does it look like if candidates make alliances and say, my supporters should put this person second, and then they should do the same for me, which has happened in a couple different ways in our elections and has been really effective in lowering the tendency of candidates, especially people who are more similar in a race, sometimes to tear each other down in order to take that block of support. And then when it comes to mayor, we had a mayor's race in 2019. It was the third time that we'd used RCV. And I think it went to show that it can benefit women. We elected our first woman as mayor. And she ran a campaign about listening to all sides, bringing people together. It was a very highly divisive mayor that we had before then. Some people loved, some people hated. And so there was a real, I think, incentive, and a lot of people who had put her as their second choice. So it was really, really powerful. We also, I would add, had a young guy who is working in the restaurant industry, running to represent like the service workers of Portland in a voice that wasn't being heard. No prior political experience, but bringing a really important voice to the table. And he was taken seriously as a candidate in a way that I think he wouldn't have been without ranked choice voting. And the people who were excited about him felt like they could put him as their first choice, and then someone that they thought, yeah, well, this person's more likely and I could be okay with them, as their second choice. And it really gave a platform to some important issues that, and the other candidates had to address what he was talking about because of that. So for all of those reasons, it was a really positive experience. We didn't have 15 candidates like we did the first time we used RCV, but we had 4 really serious candidates in a good election.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. And I am going to pass the mic over to Rob, who I know has been answering a lot of great questions in the chat as well. But I wanted to really highlight this one from one of our phone bankers, who has been working hard contacting Burlington voters about this important campaign. And I'm going to chat it to everyone now just so we can see it. But this person said, they were concerned about a party like stacking the ballot in order to prevent another party or candidate from having a chance at winning. Basically, by running additional folks under the independent label as well as their own party label, they can kind of squeeze out a certain candidate or party from having a real chance at victory in this election. So the question is, how valid of a concern is this, and how could it possibly be prevented by the implementation of ranked choice voting?
Well, that's one of the really nice features of ranked choice voting. I put a quick answer in the chat, but is the fact that it accommodates choice. That's sort of the basic principle, right? So that our ice cream example, right? Like if there's 2 flavors, the chocolate fudge brownie and the chunky monkey that had a lot of the same supporters, it's okay, right? And it doesn't help the one that's more popular to have the added choice per se, but it doesn't hurt either, because if those voters really are aligned and they just rank each, you know, up 1, 2, then the votes come together. If that extra choice wasn't there, then they would have just voted for one of them. But you know, the added choice didn't matter. And of course, on the positive side, the added choice added something to the conversation in the real world of debate and constituencies and you know, kind of speaking to the interests of different groups and then other candidates, you know, responding to those. So bottom line, strategic voting and strategic, you know, machinations go down with ranked choice voting. You can actually just, you know, vote your heart, which is great. I'll add one thing. There was a question in the chat, and it sort of the corollary to the really exciting still being learned why it's happening impact on women, where it's basically women are winning 50% of the seats with ranked choice voting, including a lot of mayoral races that they had never won, held before. But people of color are also doing extraordinarily well. So in the Bay Area, there's 53 seats using ranked choice voting, and people of color before ranked choice voting was used held about 40% of those seats, and within 10 years, they held 60% of those seats at a time when there wasn't any particular changes in the number of people of color voting. It was just different dynamics for the candidates and a kind of a different atmosphere and a different, you know, single round where turnout is maximized. And we've also seen some, you know, Melvin Carter, the African-American mayor of St. Paul, won in a very competitive race. And someone else spent more money and someone else went negative on him. And then sort of it just ultimately, you know, the ranked choice voting dynamics rewarded a, you know, very interesting, strong candidate. So some promising things going on out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. And I am just looking over some more chat questions. I have one here for Jerry. That is a bit of a tongue twister, so let me make sure I get it right. You know, Chunky Monkey seems pretty extreme. A New York Super Fudge chunk is nothing if not radical. Does ranked choice voting only elect vanilla or chubby hubby when what our city needs is justice remixed or urban bourbon?
Oh, clever. No, actually, I think it's exactly the opposite. You won't get vanilla. You know, what I love about ranked choice voting is, as has been spoken so many times, is you get to vote with your heart. You don't have to make compromises and calculations to think about who might be winning or who might be a spoiler. And that's why I support it. I don't always like a mainstream candidate, nor do I always like mainstream ice cream flavors. And ranked choice voting allows you to pick who you really like.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jerry. It's looking like the questions are starting to slow down, but let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. And if any of our attendees have a burning question in their hearts about ranked choice voting, now is the time to just go ahead and pop it in the chat or the Q&A section at the bottom here. And I guess I'll just open it up to our panelists. If anyone else has any additional thoughts or remarks they'd like to share with each other or the city of Burlington as we head toward our town meeting day election.
I have a question for Rob, Richie. Now, this is really interesting. This is about the ice cream voting, okay? So I don't exactly remember the order in which the flavors were voted on and eliminated, but here are the sales of those flavors, and I think they match up exactly with what flavors won. So out of the flavors I put up, the lowest ranking flavor in sales was Chunky Monkey. That was eliminated first, right?
I believe it was. And that was the one you made a little special pitch for, I think, too.
The next lower one was Americone Dream. The next one was Tonight Dill. The next one was Chocolate Fudge Brownie.
I definitely finished second. Yeah.
And the highest selling of those flavors was Cherry Garcia. Isn't that kind of amazing?
Yeah, that is amazing. I guess we have a lesson in polling being maybe.
Does it mean anything, or is it just totally random?
Well, I think it shows that we had a pretty representative sample here. I guess, yeah. It's interesting. It was interesting to look at the patterns. It was Cherry Garcia's vote didn't grow very much as the others were consolidated, which is, I thought, kind of interesting that it has a passionate base, but that was a majority base, but also, you know, chocolate.
I think this is a strong and compelling argument for ranked choice voting. I'm convinced.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to do a lot of ice cream testing. And ideally do it with the real thing. And maybe we'll learn a lot more about that.
I love that we had the ice cream thing. And I love that you're one of the spokespeople for this campaign, Jerry, because in Maine, we constantly use going to the store for ice cream. We're sending your spouse to the store for ice cream and saying, you know, I really want Cherry Garcia, but if they don't have that, you know, then I could live with, you know, and so it's been our go-to example for how you rank choices in your daily life. So it really couldn't be a more perfect thing to have it as part of tonight.
Can I actually add a little ice cream bit, which is one of my sort of favorite examples. Like some people say, oh, ranked choice voting somehow violates the principle of one person, one vote. Like, aren't some people getting more votes than other people? And that's been upheld in court, federal court, state court. It doesn't. It's totally a one person, one vote system. But the example I often use is if you go into an ice cream store and you ask for your favorite flavor and they don't have it, and then you settle on your second flavor, and you walk out, you didn't eat 2 ice cream cones, right? You got one, right? And you got one that made you happy, and rather than go in and they didn't have it and you just have to leave. And that's sort of the ice cream comparison that I often use.
Awesome. And I have just gotten one more question in my inbox for everyone. And this is quite possibly the most important question anyone can ask, which is, how can I get involved in the Better Ballot Burlington campaign? And I've just dropped some links in the chat. The first one is to sign up. And if you're interested in signing up, we would love to have your support, just as a regular member of the public, as a student, as a mom, as a community leader, as a person in your job. We would love to hear that you support ranked choice voting, and you can tell us that with the link below. There, you can also sign up to post on Front Porch Forum about Better Ballot Burlington and this charter change. And you can also sign up to receive a lawn sign. These are really great. They are the blue and white that you have been seeing throughout my slides and a lot of the Better Ballot Burlington branding. So if you want a lawn sign in your yard or window, or heck, even your car window, please sign up on the website. And then I also just linked our website. If anyone wants to learn more or see our additional list of supporters, you can all find it there. And thanks to everyone for joining. I'm going to hang around just in case there are last minute questions dropping in the chat. But I think that this has been such a wonderful opportunity to talk with some really amazing panelists. Thank you again to City Councilor Zoraya Hightower, who had to hop off for another official city meeting. Thank you to her Better Ballot Burlington co-chair, former Governor Howard Dean. Thank you to Jerry Greenfield, our ice cream liaison and Ben and Jerry's co-host. Thank you to Rob, who is from our partners at Fair Vote, and thank you to Anna, who is bringing all of their knowledge of the Maine experience and the support of the League of Women Voters. It's been really wonderful chatting with everyone here today. And if you have an additional question or thought or want to learn more about ranked choice voting but did get a chance today, please check out our website or shoot me an email. It's been such a pleasure, and I am so excited for Burlington to vote yes on 4 and move back to a better ballot this March. If you need to learn more about voting, it's on the city clerk's website. I will also drop that link in the chat. But please don't forget to vote. Even if you don't live in Burlington and you can't help us out with this campaign, you can call everyone you know in Burlington, shoot an email to your friends, make sure that folks know to vote yes on 4 for the better ballot in Burlington. All right. Thanks again, all.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.